The glass tower glowed against the night sky, a monument to certainty that had never imagined doubt. Inside, the billionaire sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, knuckles white, eyes fixed on screens bleeding red. Billions evaporated in silence. Years of dominance unraveled in real time. Lawyers spoke too fast. Advisors spoke too softly. No one wanted to be the one who said it out loud. The empire was collapsing. This man had built his fortune by believing money could bend reality. Problems had always retreated when confronted with enough capital, enough influence, enough pressure. But tonight, nothing moved. Markets ignored him. Algorithms betrayed him. The system he trusted refused to obey. For the first time, power felt useless. A senior executive cleared her throat, then stopped. Another checked his phone, pretending not to panic. The room smelled like expensive cologne and fear. Outside the glass walls, the city kept breathing, indifferent to the crisis unfolding above it. That was when the doors opened. Security turned, irritated, already rehearsing an apology. A man stood in the hallway, clothes worn thin, shoes scarred by miles of pavement. He did not belong in this cathedral of wealth. His presence felt like a mistake someone would immediately correct. Before anyone could stop him, he spoke. "I can fix it." 6 words, unforced, not loud enough to demand attention, yet impossible to ignore. Laughter flickered across the table, sharp and dismissive. Someone muttered about protocol, another about liability. The billionaire looked up slowly, disbelief hardening into irritation. Who let someone like that inside? Who thinks desperation opens the door to fantasy? But the man didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't explain. He simply stood there, eyes steady, as if chaos were a language he understood better than the people paid to manage it. In that moment, the room split in two. On one side, wealth, credentials, certainty. On the other, a stranger with nothing to sell and nothing to lose. The system had already decided who mattered. No one knew who he was, but something in his voice warned them that what he was about to say would not just solve a problem. It would humiliate power itself in front of everyone. Before that night, the billionaire's story had always been told the same way. Born into corridors of privilege, educated to command, trained to believe leadership meant never hesitating. He learned early that control was currency. He collected companies the way others collected stamps, stacking victories until dominance felt like destiny. Media praised his confidence. Boards rewarded his aggression. Every room bent toward him, and he mistook that bending for respect. He believed success was proof of merit, that the market was fair, that anyone smart enough, tough enough, hungry enough could rise. The world had reinforced that belief so often it hardened into ideology. When people fell behind, he assumed they chose the wrong moves. Failure, to him, was a personal flaw. The man in the hallway came from a different story, one no one bothered to ask about. He had crossed borders, both visible and invisible. Once, his mind had been sharp enough to build systems others depended on. Once, he spoke in rooms like this. His accent softened only when he realized it made people uncomfortable. Then came a collapse that didn't trend, didn't headline, didn't care how talented he was. One illness, one layoff, one visa complication. The ladder disappeared beneath his feet. He learned how quickly brilliance becomes invisible without status attached to it. How easily society confuses poverty with incompetence. He slept where he could, worked when allowed, listened more than he spoke. While the billionaire mastered domination, he mastered observation. While one learned to talk over people, the other learned to wait. Now those two worlds touched, and the reaction was immediate. Security tightened their stance, eyes narrowing. Executives exchanged looks that mixed amusement and annoyance. Someone whispered that this was a distraction they didn't need. Online, if anyone had been watching, the comments would have poured in instantly. "This guy doesn't belong here. Who let him in?" Another reminder that order must be protected from disruption. The billionaire felt the sting of embarrassment more than curiosity. His crisis was already public enough. The presence of a homeless man in his boardroom felt like an insult layered onto failure. He straightened in his chair, authority returning to his posture, ready to have the interruption removed. But the stranger didn't perform humility the way people expected. He didn't apologize for existing in the wrong space. He didn't shrink under the weight of judgment. He looked around calmly, absorbing the tension, recognizing it as familiar. He had seen this room before, just from the other side of the glass. Something unsettled the billionaire then, though he couldn't name it. The confidence in that voice hadn't sounded desperate. It hadn't sounded delusional. It sounded practiced, as if the man understood systems better than the people who worshipped them. He studied the man more closely now, noticing details he had missed. The steadiness of his breathing, the patience in his eyes. This was not rebellion. This was not chance. It was experience shaped by exclusion. Around the table, a few advisors sensed it too. The faint discomfort of realizing that expertise sometimes survives outside institutions. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. In that silence lived a dangerous possibility, that success might not be proof of wisdom, that intelligence could exist without permission, that the system rewarding one man had quietly discarded another just as capable. The billionaire felt something crack, not his pride, but his certainty. For years, he had believed control came from commanding others. Now he wondered if it came from listening instead. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the stranger, and asked a single question no one expected him to ask. And when the billionaire finally listened, the room realized it had misjudged the wrong man. What followed would force every person there to confront how power sounds when it is finally questioned by someone they were trained. The man didn't start with numbers. That surprised them. He didn't reach for a screen or ask for access. He spoke instead about habits, about decisions made too quickly because power had grown impatient. He said the problem wasn't the market, or the software, or the regulators circling outside the glass walls. The problem was thinking that scale made a system smarter. It didn't. It only made mistakes louder. A few executives shifted in their seats. This wasn't analysis. This felt like criticism. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He had paid consultants millions to say less. Still, he didn't interrupt. Something about the way the man spoke felt controlled, deliberate, as if every sentence had survived harder scrutiny than this room could offer. You built for speed, the man continued. Voice steady, but you forgot resilience. You optimized for winning, not surviving. He pointed to a single decision made years earlier, one celebrated at the time, one no one questioned because profits kept climbing. That choice, he said, created a blind spot. Everything that followed grew around it like a crack hidden behind polished glass. Someone laughed sharply. Another executive pushed back, defensive, insisting the data didn't support that theory. The man nodded, almost gently, and asked them to pull up a different set of numbers. Not projections, not summaries, raw inputs. The room hesitated, then complied. That's the data appeared. The tone changed. Patterns emerged that had been ignored because they didn't fit the success narrative. Small failures repeated, warnings buried under confidence. The billionaire leaned forward now, eyes scanning faster, breath shallow. This wasn't coincidence. This was structure. You assumed people would behave the way you wanted, the man said, because they always had before. But systems don't respect power. They respond to incentives. He explained how fear had replaced honesty inside the company, how silence had been rewarded, how leadership had unknowingly trained people to hide bad news. Money had bought loyalty, not truth. Tension climbed. One advisor snapped that this was theoretical, untested. The man didn't argue. He asked for permission to change one variable. Just one. In real time. The billionaire hesitated. Every instinct screamed risk, but the screens were already bleeding. He nodded once. They watched. Minutes passed. The room held its breath as numbers refreshed. Losses slowed, then stabilized. Then, impossibly, reversed. A whisper rippled across the table. Someone checked another screen, then another. The shift held. No applause came, or replaced noise. The billionaire felt something colder than panic crawl up his spine. This wasn't luck. This was understanding. The man hadn't fought anyone. He hadn't exposed them publicly. He had simply shown what they refused to see. More executives pushed back now, not laughing but bargaining. Could it scale? Was it sustainable? The man answered without arrogance, without triumph. He acknowledged limits. He admitted uncertainty. That honesty landed harder than confidence ever could. For years, the billionaire had rewarded certainty, mistaking it for strength. The solution unfolded piece by piece, each adjustment undoing another assumption. Each correction revealed how deeply ego had shaped strategy. Silence filled the room again, heavier than before, not from confusion, but recognition. Power had been loud. Wisdom had been patient. The billionaire stared at the screens, then at the man. He felt exposed, not by accusation, but by clarity. All his influence, all his money, had failed where listening succeeded. He had believed leadership meant control. Tonight it meant surrendering certainty. The room knew it too. Advisors avoided eye contact. Security stood frozen. The hierarchy that once felt unshakable now seemed fragile, built on rituals rather than truth. The man stepped back, as if finished, as if fixing the company had been the simplest part. The billionaire opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands trembled, just slightly. This wasn't about profit anymore. This was about identity, about realizing that everything he had been praised for had also blinded him. Fixing the company was easy. He understood that now. What came next shattered him completely. The billionaire stood, slowly this time, as if speed itself had betrayed him. The room waited. He looked at the man who had just dismantled years of certainty without raising his voice. For the first time that night, there was no performance in his posture, no dominance to display, only a question he had never learned how to ask. He did what power always does when it feels threatened. He reached for money. He spoke about compensation, about resources, about a position that could be created immediately. He offered an office, a team, access to everything this building represented. The words came faster now, relief creeping into his voice. This was the language he trusted. This was how imbalance was usually resolved. The man listened without interrupting. When the offer ended, he shook his head once, not defiantly, not proudly, just enough to make the refusal unmistakable. "You don't need me here," he said, "and I don't need what you're offering." Confusion rippled across the table. Someone whispered that this was madness. Another frowned, calculating what kind of leverage had just been rejected. The billionaire felt heat rise in his chest, then something else, colder and heavier, the realization that this problem could not be purchased away. The man spoke again, quieter now, and somehow the room leaned toward him. "You don't lose empires because of bad markets. You lose them because you stop listening. You surround yourself with agreement and call it loyalty. You confuse silence for stability, and one day, the truth stops knocking." No accusation followed, no bitterness, just a statement of fact, delivered without cruelty. He explained how power isolates, how success edits feedback until only praise remains, how systems decay not from enemies, but from neglect disguised as confidence. The billionaire's shoulders sagged. The lesson landed because it wasn't framed as failure. It was framed as consequence. He saw it all at once. The meetings where dissent disappeared, the moments he had dismissed discomfort as incompetence, the times he had chosen certainty over curiosity. Around the table, executives watched something they had never seen before, authority yielding, not to pressure, to humility, the hierarchy inverted in silence. The man with nothing was teaching the man with everything how little control he actually had. The billionaire felt his throat tighten. This wasn't humiliation. It was released. The weight of pretending to know everything lifted, just enough to breathe. He nodded, once, slowly, acknowledging the truth he had spent years avoiding. Outside the room, the story was already escaping. Someone recorded a clip, someone else leaked a message. By morning, timelines would fill with reactions. "This changed how I see success. This is what leadership looks like." For once, money didn't win. The man turned to leave, as unnoticed as he had arrived. No handshake, no applause. He had given the lesson. What happened next was no longer his responsibility. The billionaire watched him go, then looked back at the room. Faces waited for instruction, but he didn't rush to speak. For the first time, silence felt useful. He understood now that fixing systems was simple compared to fixing himself. He took a breath, deeper than before, and made a decision that would ripple far beyond this building. And when the billionaire finally said it out loud, it shocked everyone watching, because power had chosen something it almost never chooses. By morning, the company still stood, but it was no longer the same structure it had been the night before. The markets reopened, cautious but steady. Losses were contained. Systems recalibrated. Headlines spoke of recovery, but inside the building something deeper had shifted. Meetings changed tone. Questions were asked instead of assumptions. Silence was no longer mistaken for agreement. The empire survived, not because it was powerful, but because it finally learned how fragile it had been. The billionaire arrived later than usual. No entourage, no rehearsed confidence. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was to admit uncertainty. That admission rippled through the organization faster than any directive ever had. People noticed. Some resisted. Others felt permission to be honest for the first time in years. Power loosened its grip, and in that space, trust began to form. He stepped back from the spotlight he once chased. Not dramatically, quietly, he delegated. Not to protect himself, but to rebuild accountability. The press searched for scandal and found none. There was no villain arc to sell. No triumphant ego to frame. Just a man learning, publicly, that control had never been the same as leadership. The stranger did not appear in interviews. No profile followed him. He left the building and returned to anonymity with the same calm he had carried inside. Those who tried to find him failed. There were no quotes to monetize, no brand to attach. Praise passed over him like weather, unnoticed and unclaimed. He had not come to be seen. He had come to speak once, and that was enough. Online, the story took on a life of its own. Clips circulated, comment sections filled with people recognizing themselves in the moment. Immigrants, workers, the overlooked, the dismissed. They saw dignity where society had trained them to expect shame. They saw intelligence survive erasure. They saw proof that value does not vanish just because it is ignored. Weeks passed. The company stabilized. Profits returned, slower but stronger. Yet the real change was harder to measure. Decisions took longer. Listening took effort, and that effort became the new metric of success. The billionaire understood now that wealth had protected him from consequences, not from mistakes. Wisdom had found him only when money failed. No plaque marked the lesson. No policy captured its weight. It lived instead in restraint, in the questions leaders asked themselves before speaking, in the awareness that authority without humility is just noise. The man who once believed power was proven by dominance learned that it is revealed by restraint. The city continued as it always had. Towers glowing, lives intersecting without acknowledgement. Somewhere within it, a man with nothing carried everything he needed. Somewhere above him, a man with everything finally understood what he lacked. Their paths would not cross again, and they did not need to. Justice doesn't shout, truth doesn't beg, and real power doesn't need to prove itself. It waits, it listens, and it recognizes value even when the world refuses to name it. In the end, the billionaire fixed his company, but the homeless man fixed something far more expensive: his soul.